of ambition, royal intrigue and imprisonment in the Tower of London.
One of the most infamous crimes in British history, and it's remained unsolved for more than 500 years.
We're talking about the murder of two young princes, Edward and Richard, in the Tower of London.
In the warm summer of 1674, workers clearing debris at the Tower of London uncovered a small wooden chest hidden deep beneath a staircase. When they pried it open, they froze.
The builders discovered underneath a staircase 2 skeletons, and they were clearly skeletons of children. And the king was in no doubt. He had found the missing princes.
Their bones were taken quietly to Westminster Abbey, laid to rest with an inscription naming them as Edward V and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewbury.
They disappear in the tower soon after. Some people believe that they were murdered.
The mystery of their disappearance, whispers of murder, betrayal, and royal ambition has hung over British history ever since. Did their uncle, Richard III, order their deaths? Would he be found guilty beyond reasonable doubt?
And if we were to put that to an ordinary jury, was Richard guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of killing his nephews in the Tower of London?
Or was another hand responsible for silencing them forever?
More claims that Richard III ordered the murder of his nephews.
Now, with modern science finally entering the conversation, DNA may be ready to speak for the dead, and what it reveals could overturn everything we thought we knew. The fall of a royal house. The story begins in the late 15th century, a time when crowns were won through war, not inheritance. King Edward IV had restored order after years of brutal conflict between the houses of York and Lancaster. But when he died unexpectedly in April of 1483, everything unraveled. Edward left behind 2 sons. Edward, aged 12, bright, confident, preparing to become King Edward V, and Richard, aged 9, energetic, affectionate, and devoted to his older brother. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, came from a powerful and controversial family, and enemies circled quickly. Before his death, the king had appointed his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector. Trusted, respected, loyal, at least on the surface. The young Edward V was brought to London for his coronation and placed, by tradition, inside the Tower of London to await the ceremony. His brother joined him soon after, taken from sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. But then the whispers began. The coronation was delayed, then cancelled. The boys were seen less and less. Eventually, they disappeared from public view entirely. In June, Parliament declared the boys illegitimate. In July, Richard of Gloucester crowned himself King Richard III. The princes remained in the tower. For a short time, guards reported seeing them playing in the gardens. Then, nothing. By the end of the summer, the 2 heirs to the throne had vanished. No official record, no explanation, no bodies. Only a silence that has echoed for centuries. Who killed the princess? Theories and suspects. For generations, the greatest suspicion has fallen on Richard III. Motive, clear. Opportunity, undeniable. With the boys alive, no one would ever fully accept him as king. A man named James Tyrrell later claimed to have confessed to the murder, saying he ordered 2 servants to smother the boys as they slept. But the confession appeared decades after the events and was likely politically engineered. Historians doubted it for centuries, until 2024. That year, a newly discovered document stunned researchers, the 500-year-old will of Margaret Capel, who died in 1522. Inside, she left her son a precious heirloom, a gold chain once belonging to King Edward V, the elder prince. This royal chain was a symbol of the boy king's status, never meant to pass into private hands. And Margaret Capel. She was the sister-in-law of James Tyrrell, the man accused of killing the princes. For the first time, there was an actual physical link, an object belonging to the missing prince mysteriously kept within the family of the alleged murderer. But Richard III wasn't the only suspect. Duke of Buckingham, a former ally of Richard who later rebelled against him. Ambitious, powerful, unpredictable. Some believe he acted alone, either to please Richard or to seize the throne himself. Henry Tudor and Lady Margaret Beaufort. Henry Tudor, later Henry VIII, was in exile at the time, but eliminating the princes would have cleared his path to the crown. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, was politically brilliant and fiercely driven. But Henry was far from London, making direct involvement unlikely. Death by illness. Some suggest the princes died naturally in the Tower, a place known for poor health and disease. But such a tragedy would have required absolute secrecy and protection from someone powerful. Escape? For centuries, stories circulated that at least one prince survived. The most famous was Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, the younger boy. His story captivated Europe, but was never proven. The 1974 discovery. The two small skeletons found beneath the staircase in 1674 were taken as proof. After the discovery, they were placed in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey, sealed by order of King Charles II. But this rested on assumption, not evidence. In 1933, experts examined the bones. They determined the children were likely the correct ages, and scraps of fine cloth suggested noble birth. But without DNA or modern testing, nothing could be confirmed. The bones were incomplete, mixed with others, and the science of the time was far too limited. The urn was resealed. The questions remained. If the bones are the princes, the Tower of London becomes not just their prison, but their grave. Richard III's legacy may be rewritten forever. The greatest royal mystery in English history would be solved, with tragedy at its heart. If the bones are not the princes, then the story becomes even darker. Where are Edward and Richard really buried? Were they smuggled out? Did they escape? Or were they killed elsewhere? The mystery would explode open again. The mystery that refuses to die. The Tower of London still holds its secrets. Westminster Abbey still guards its silent urn. History still waits for science to speak. One day, the final chapter may be written. Until then, the story of the princes in the Tower remains one of history's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. What do you think happened to the two young princes? Were they victims of betrayal, or did one of them live on? Implications of the discovery. If DNA testing has finally confirmed what happened to the lost princes in the Tower of London, then the implications stretch far beyond a single mystery. This discovery would not merely close a historical chapter, it would rewrite royal history, expose centuries of political manipulation, and even force the world to reconsider one of England's most infamous kings. What the DNA reveals does not just identify two children. It exposes a system of power willing to destroy its own bloodline to survive. First, confirmation would forever settle one of Britain's greatest historical debates. Were the bones in Westminster Abbey truly those of Edward V and Richard, Duke of York? If DNA proves they are, then the Tower of London becomes the unquestioned site of their murder. No more speculation, no more comforting theories of escape or illness. It means the princes died inside those walls, and someone made sure their story would be buried with them. The centuries-old silence surrounding their fate would suddenly become a very real, very human crime. The second, and perhaps most explosive implication, is what this means for King Richard III. For generations he's been portrayed as the villain, the uncle who seized the throne through the murder of two innocent boys. Yet defenders have argued he was framed by Tudor propaganda. DNA confirmation of the prince's fate would force historians to revisit Richard's reign with unforgiving clarity. If evidence suggests he ordered or allowed their deaths, then the image of Richard as a misunderstood ruler collapses. His reputation would darken even further, solidifying him as one of the most controversial monarchs in English history. On the other hand, if the DNA points away from Richard III, if the remains reveal clues inconsistent with his involvement, the implications grow even darker. It could mean someone else committed the crime, a rival noble, a political opportunist, or even a future king. This would expose a far more chaotic and ruthless power struggle than previously imagined. It would imply that the prince's deaths were not the act of a single villain, but the result of a fractured kingdom where multiple factions were willing to kill for the crown. That possibility shakes the foundations of how the Wars of the Roses ended and how the Tudor dynasty rose to power. Third, DNA confirmation would have a profound impact on royal legitimacy. If the princes were indeed murdered to secure a throne, it exposes how fragile and violent the path to power often was. It forces a darker understanding of monarchy, not as a divine line ordained by God, but as a dangerous game where even children were pawns. It would highlight how the death of these boys shaped the future of England, the collapse of the House of York, the rise of the Tudors, and the birth of a new royal narrative built on the silence of two lost heirs. The discovery would also change how we view historical evidence and legend. For centuries, the story of the princes shifted between history and myth, tainted by propaganda and political agenda. DNA would replace centuries of rumor with scientific truth. It would show that modern technology can reach through time to challenge what chroniclers, playwrights, and monarchs told us. Shakespeare's version of Richard III, long accepted as fact, would either be vindicated or shattered. Finally, the discovery has a deeply human implication. For the first time in 540 years, Edward and Richard would become more than symbols. They would become real children, brothers whose lives were cut short by forces far beyond their control. Their story would no longer be a lesson in politics, but a tragedy of innocence lost. DNA confirmation would give them back their names, their identities, and their place in history. In the end, the implications of this discovery are not just historical, they are moral. It forces us to confront the darkest corners of power, the silence of institutions, and the weight of truth withheld for centuries. And it reminds us that even the greatest thrones can rest on the smallest graves.